But I love the library. I use the library all the time.
Was it? I just think things are. I mean, it's kind of a newish piece. Like a process.
Yeah, I mean, what we use is like everyone's read. All the books I've read. I have subscriptions. I don't know if they've done it since the
They must have done. I don't know. So this is my fourth year at the so I'm not like fully versed on the history. No, cheap and yeah. So okay. I mostly know the science so like, analysis. You know any of those?
mostly within CMDI.
Okay.
Like our college, which is like everything from like info science
Yeah.
to now we have environmental design, which is like big and then
Yeah.
apparently it's strong. The world has just such a strong.
Yeah. Phil, nice to meet you. I'm on.
I'm just associated.
You just had to convince 9 people to be in the same room as you for 20 minutes at least to pay attention and ask questions.
I mean, one of my meeting members forgot about my moral defense. And so I showed up with where's Joe? And she just sent me an email like 20 minutes. Oh, that was today. I'll send you comments.
It's not like your whole life.
No, it's like, not like that was in
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our workshop, Is Media Ruining America? This is week 5 of our 5-part series examining how fake news and propaganda are contributing to political polarization and threatening our democracy. I'm Rebecca Winning, a League of Women Voters volunteer, and I also want to introduce my colleague and fellow volunteer, Beverly George, who will serve as our moderator this evening. This week, we're excited to present a panel of experts to weigh in on what we've learned in the past few weeks. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones and refrain from recording the panel. I want to thank the Jefferson Unitarian Church for hosting these events. They've done a fabulous job with everything, and they're great partners to the league, and we really appreciate them. I also want to thank all the Jeffco League members who've helped us design, deliver, and manage these sessions. And we'd like to request that you complete an evaluation form at the end of this presentation. They're on the table as you walked in, and there's pens, so please grab one and fill out an evaluation form for us before you go. Now I'd like to introduce our panel. These folks bring a wealth of expertise and experience to the topics at hand, and I know we're all anxious to hear what they have to say. First, we have Dr. Philip Chen, Associate Professor of Political Science, University of Denver, and an expert in modern media and its effect on current politics. Next, we have Bob Steele. He's running a little late. He'll be here shortly, hopefully. Journalism professor and ethics advisor, and an expert on how to identify ethical reporters and responsible media outlets. Third, Dr. Chris Jennings, professor and chair of the Journalism and Media Production Department at Metro State University, and an expert on artificial intelligence and its impact on the media. Next, Larry Rickman, co-founder and publisher of the Colorado Sun, and a frontline warrior in the battle for the survival of fake news. And finally, Dr. Angelica Kalika, assistant teaching professor of journalism, University of Colorado at Boulder, and an expert on youth trends in the media. And now, I'm going to pass this on to Beverly George, our moderator for the evening.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone and our panelists for coming this evening. We'll begin this evening's discussion by asking each panelist a question or questions related to their area of expertise, and invite other panelists to weigh in on the questions as well. Then we'll ask more general questions addressed to the entire panel. And then, if time allows, we'll take questions from the audience. So, Dr. Chen, we'll start with you. In our earlier sessions, we learned, let me just stop for a minute. Come on up, Mr. Steele. Thank you.
Apologies.
No apologies needed. Thank you. All right, so in our earlier sessions, we learned how modern media is polarizing our country and fueling a dangerous political divide that threatens our democracy. What are the biggest risks you see to our upcoming elections, and how can we address those risks?
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. I assume this is on. Can you hear me? Excellent. So, in thinking about this question, I kind of come up with three things that are sort of weighing on my mind. The first one is I will say these are threats that I think are threats to our elections, or risks for our elections that are not unique to the media, but that are exacerbated by the trends that we see in media today. So the first one is just growing distrust, both in elections, but also in each other. And so it'd be one thing if we had sort of growing distrust in the elections. That's not good. That's not, we don't want that, and that distrust seems to be unfounded. But we also are faced with just a really significant gap in trust in people who we disagree with politically. And that is, again, fueled by any number of different root causes of individual level affective polarization. But a lot of that is exacerbated by social media, by the algorithms that drive what we see. So first kind of piece that I am sort of worried about is distrust in elections and in each other. So just growing lack of trust. The second piece that I am worried about is foreign influence. And this isn't foreign influence in, I think, the way a lot of people think about it in terms of, donating money or trying to buy elections or things like that, or sort of the conspiracy theories around, ballot harvesting or fake ballots submitted from China. No, there's no evidence of that. I'm talking about the type of foreign influence that we see with enemies or adversaries of the United States who want to sow distrust and disagreement and conflict. Kathleen Hall Jamieson has a great book about the 2016 election called Cyber War, where she traces the extent to which Russian disinformation campaigns were used to drive disagreement and polarization and arguments between Democrats and Republicans, not to help one side or the other win, but to drive to cause the U.S. to be less able to react to and account for things that Russia wanted to do. She tells a really interesting story of basically Russian troll farms setting up an in-person protest where they were organizing both sides of the protest and recruiting people from the area to attend this protest and counter-protest, both of which were organized through Russian troll farms. And then the third one is lack of shared facts and shared experiences. This is something we used to have. We used to have media that shared a similar set of facts, a similar set of ideas. That it was, I tell my students, we picked the news to watch based on which anchor we liked, and that's what we watched in growing up. That's not the case anymore, and so we don't have shared facts or shared experiences, and that's, I think, really problematic. And I could talk more, but I will stop there and let others go.
Thank you. Does anybody else on the panel want to weigh in? Anything you want to contribute?
I love that you brought up a lack of shared experience. Something as simple as when I was a kid in 1995 was the year of every weekend were the best movies ever. I think it's when Clueless came out and a whole bunch of fun stuff. And so then you would come together and there was media out there, news outlets out there that we all watched at the same time and we could all relate to. We could all come together and have some shared meaning. And even today, when I enter my classroom with Gen Z, and this Gen Z was in COVID, and I think COVID is really important to bring up for their development. It was middle school to high school. So they were in two different schools during COVID online. That transition was online. It's really hard to find these shared experiences that are meaningful because that's how people can connect. And then does that, again, also lead to you having shared values? And if you have shared values, then you have a shared imagined audience in your brain of who the American people are and what do we stand for and what do we actually believe as a country? And does that actually help us create community? And is that somehow part of the foundation of community building?
Anyone else? All right, we'll go on to the next question. And Bob Steele, this question goes to you. We've also learned that there are more and more malign actors posing as journalists and influencers today, but we also know there are reputable journalists and media outlets out there who believe passionately in the public good and offer valid reporting on the issues of the day. How can we identify, follow, and support ethical reporters and news outlets?
First of all, my apologies for arriving late. It brings back bad memories of growing up and going to a Catholic grade school when I would arrive late for Mass. Sister Conradia would latch onto the back of my neck and drag me to the pew closest to the confessional and whisper very loudly into my ear how many Hail Marys and Our Fathers I would be ordered to say. So my apologies. How do we know who are the ethical reporters and the ethical news organizations? The short answer is tain't easy. In this landscape we are in right now, of very scattered, increased lack of shared experience, media landscape, it is all the tougher. And there are indeed a number of individuals and at times organizations out there who portray themselves in a way that they are telling the public, the citizens, the individuals who need straightforward, truthful, factual, meaningful information, that they're giving them that. And as we know, that isn't always the case. Among the things that we can do as consumers is be appropriately skeptical, not cynical. If we turn cynical, I think that is going to corrode our ability to function meaningfully well in a society. I think that it's very important that we bring both a degree of common sense and a certain amount of our own introspection as to our own biases as we consume the news, whether we're listening, watching, reading, combinations thereof. Recognize where we are coming from, because we all do have a certain degree of bias based on the beliefs that we hold. And the reality is that journalists have their own beliefs as well. Now, good journalists and good news organizations do their very best to minimize the impact of the beliefs of individual journalists on the content of the news product. Good editors will constantly be asking the journalists, how do you know that? How do you know that? Many times along the way. Where's your evidence? Who are your sources? And as consumers, we should be reading, listening, watching what we get as journalism in a way that we are assessing those sources. What's the validity of the identification of the sources in the stories? If there is very little identification of who those sources are, and there are multiple examples of sources who wish not to be identified, then our antenna should be flipping around, wondering if there's some corrosion in the ethical and journalistic content of what you're reading, watching, listening to. I also suggest that it's good to take a look at the news organization that you're using to get your information. Go to their website and look and see if they list what the ethical standards are and principles that that news organization uses to guide that organization's journalists. If you go to the Colorado Sun, Larry and his colleagues there are very good, very deliberate, very specific in listing what their ethical standards and practices are in terms of how they gather information, how they make decisions on what's published in the Colorado Sun, and they're very open to being challenged. And that's always an important step as well. If you have concerns about an organization, you should challenge them as best as possible. Not easy to challenge the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, ABC News, although you can. And sometimes you might even get a meaningful response. The suggestion is, don't just sit on your hands. Become an active consumer of journalism. And I really, really encourage you to draw a distinction between journalism and the media. Journalism is part of the media, but not all of the media is journalism. In fact, a great deal of what is media is not journalism. It's not a grounded, principled, ethical, substantive, skilled approach to gathering, vetting, and presenting the news. So make sure that you're not just going online or listening to something on the radio or watching something on YouTube or elsewhere on television and thinking that it's necessarily journalism. It might very well be, but bring a critical eye to it, and that's very important. So those are a few things that are in my mind as to how we can protect ourselves, protect the essence of what is good in our country by being good, serious, substantive consumers, just as we want the journalists to be that in their work.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the panel want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to thank Bob, and I want to tell you all that I did not pay him to offer that testimonial. I appreciate that. You know, trust is at the heart of you know, some of the issues that we have. People don't know who to trust, and I mean, Bob is right. We've taken great steps at the Sun to show our work, to demonstrate that we are worthy of trust, to demonstrate that we're human beings. We make mistakes. And to me, that is one of the key markers of a legitimate news organization. Do they acknowledge mistakes? Do they correct them? Do they hide them, you know, under the rug? Or do they make it easy for you to call us out and for you to say, okay, I can go and take a look at the Colorado Sun and see that we hate making mistakes, by the way, but we are humans. And we acknowledge them. You can go to our corrections page and see, you know, on such and such a day, at such and such a time, that we corrected a story. You make another really great point, which is that we have to be active consumers. You know, to me, I speak to a lot of students, and I was at the University of Colorado, this is a while back, and I always ask the students, like, who here subscribes to a newspaper? And I kind of get, you know, this, you know, who subscribes to a magazine? Same kind of thing. Like, okay, where do you guys get your news? And I, you know, kind of got a shrug of the shoulders, and I picked on one young woman in this one class, and she said, you know, I said, where do you get your news? And she said, you know, I don't know, from my news feed. And I said, I don't know what that means exactly. Can you explain that to me? And, you know, I knew what she meant, and I said, well, why don't you care where you get your news from? You know, again, when we were growing up, it was a very deliberate thing. You know, I subscribed to Sports Illustrated. I was sports obsessed when I was a kid. We subscribed to the newspaper. I was a newspaper boy and delivered it. We watched the 6 o'clock news. It was appointment viewing. That's not the case anymore. You know, particularly young people, they're just inundated. We all are, with a fire hose of information. We don't know who to trust. And you know, as I asked her, well, why don't you care? Why do you allow an algorithm to decide what you should read? And she said, well, the news is depressing. It's just a downer. And I said, well, you know, with all due respect, that's like saying that you don't like food because all you've ever eaten is fast food. And what we try to do at the Colorado Sun and other legitimate news organizations is to provide a fine meal, where at the end of it, you know, maybe you've got a cup of coffee and at the end of the meal, you push back from the table, you know, like, that was filling. I got something out of that, you know, not just hollow calories. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and Larry, you make a really good point about good news. You know, I think it's important for people to seek out good news. In fact, there's a good news network out there that I go to daily.
Could you speak a little closer?
Yep, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
All apologies. Seeking out good news is extremely important in this day and age, especially right now with the world issues that we have going on. And I often go to the Good News Network on a daily basis just to get a dose of what's going well in the world, you know. And another point here is the separation of media and journalism. Really important point that was made there, Bob. And the reason why this is important is that when we label any large group and say the media, and then automatically assume that every member of the media is bad, it's not going to get us anywhere. You know, we know this. We know this from other instances of using that. So really, you know, seeking out the truth is hard, but it can be done. You know, we had some really good examples of that. And it's really the bias of the organization. You know, looking at, you know, what's the background? What's the purpose of the organization that owns the news, which is really problematic right now in Denver, especially when we look at the broadcast spectrum. It's really scary what's happening right now. And again, we talked about Colorado law earlier.
Because of ownership issues.
There's ownership issues. I would not, and I hate to say this, I would not watch much of the local broadcast news, not much anymore. Kyle Clark still kind of follows his own path, but the ownership here in Denver is becoming pretty, it's scary.
And it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And if we're talking at the local level, about 52 community, you know, media organizations across Colorado were impacted by the $1.1 billion cuts at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So this is something to keep in mind. I mean, they got some emergency funding from Knight Foundation and others, but you know, keep them in your hearts and your minds. Those local media, radio, news, print.
We could probably talk all night just on this very question,
Sure,
but
sure.
I just would say one other thing, which is that I think a big problem for us as a society is that there's a lot of opinion on cable news and whatnot that masquerades as news.
Yes.
And that has been just very corrosive, I think, to our society in general. So again, it's tough for people to be able to distinguish, am I watching straight news or am I watching opinion, commentary?
Yeah. Opinion and commentary have been an important part of journalism for decades, centuries. The editorial pages of newspapers, disagree with them as you might. The op-ed section, where you'd have ideally some differing views, points of perspective on important issues in our national, local, global society, important to have. So commentary can be good. It can force us to think about what we believe in. It can open doors to some aha moments. But the point is so valid of drawing that distinction between what's opinion, and that can be part of journalism, but what is not straight news reporting.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. Now we're going to move on and talk about artificial intelligence, or AI. And Dr. Jennings, this question is for you. It seems like AI is advancing at a furious rate, almost faster than our ability to anticipate and manage outcomes. What, if anything, keeps you up at night about the recent explosion of AI and its potential to disrupt our lives and our democracy, especially when it comes to media and its potential impact on upcoming elections? And what can we do to mitigate these risks?
Well, my wife's here, and she could tell you that I lose a lot of sleep over this, and a lot. I mean, really, what worries me the most, and this is pretty typical, is the law catching up with the technology. And you know, I could say that the Library of Congress and the Copyright Office is in due diligence right now, trying to do their best. They put a committee together. They've been addressing it. Right now, they've focused on clarifying two distinct areas of AI, which is a help. But we know the process and how long it takes, and the technology is moving faster than we can make these decisions. You know, and decisions that we can't take lightly, and decisions that are made by a committee of people that have to fully understand the technology that is in front of them, and that's not always the case either. You know, so there's a lot of catch up for these people to kind of have a basic understanding of what are we creating laws for. You know, so that's one thing. Lack of consequences is another, and that comes a lot from what Dr. Chen and Bob was talking about in terms of this sort of situation that we get into when we get used to being in social media settings. It's something that I found when I was doing work in virtual reality, where you hide behind an avatar and you're not face-to-face with a person. So you're more willing to act out, say things that you wouldn't say in front of them face-to-face. And that really quickly went from a theory to being the truth in a matter of 2 or 3 years. I was talking about it in a theory in class at about 2007, and by 2010, it wasn't a theory any longer. And the third thing that really concerns me with a tool that is very powerful, and I would say most people that are using it right now have no idea what they're getting themselves into. They don't. You know, this is so powerful, and the results. We have students that are trying to use it in class, and it's very clear when they turn something in that's AI generated, and then they think, oh man, whew, I got that homework in on time, and we're like, you think you did, right? Well, you know, that's problematic, and with the election coming up, it's going to create media and inaccuracies at a faster pace than we had in the last election. And not only are other countries going to use this to create confusion, if we remember what happened in 2016, one of the biggest things that was problematic at that time with misinformation was confusion. People were so confused they didn't know what to believe. They didn't know how to react to it. And what my biggest fear for the society is an idea that's been bounced around called the decision paralysis. That it could get to the point to where we have society so confused and not believing anything. And the reaction is, I won't vote. I just won't vote. And that did happen in 2016 to a point. We had certain demographics of people that did not vote because they didn't trust, and they specifically said that I don't believe in it, and I don't like either candidate, or, they had a lot of different reasons. But most of it was based off of either they didn't bother looking anybody up because they didn't know what to believe about either of the candidates. And that, to me, is the one thing that can really downgrade our society, because right now we don't have a majority of the people voting anybody into office. And that's not what our forefathers wanted. We had a two-party system specifically set up so one person could get a majority of the votes over another person, not have 6 or 7 candidates that get 4% of the population voting for them. But we have two primary candidates, and we still have a very paltry amount of our population actually voting. And a lot of it, I think, is based off of this paralysis, and it's just going to keep getting worse.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
We've taken kind of a hard line on AI at the Colorado Sun. It's a fireable offense if a reporter used AI to write a story. Having said that, AI is a tool. It is here. I mean, spell check is a form of AI, right? We all use some form of it, and it is a tool that, like any other, can be used for good or can be used for ill. We have seen newspapers that used AI-generated book reviews that the books did not exist. AI invented the books, and the newspapers, legacy newspapers, printed these book reviews. We have, it's the Cleveland Plain Dealer that's using AI generative AI to write stories. And they claim that, they're being vetted by editors and whatnot. But, to me, I look at AI as, we can't pretend that it's not here and that it's not going to get, become more, a greater part of our lives. To me, I see it potentially as a force multiplier for me at the Colorado Sun. We're a statewide news organization. We cannot be everywhere. We have a staff of 28, and I'm proud of that. We grew from 10 to 28, so that's a good thing. But it's a big old state, and there are city councils, county commissions that we cannot cover. That's just the reality. With AI, it is possible to use an AI tool to feed in a recording, say, of a city council meeting, and to spit back to us a transcript, and tell me whenever this city council talks about water, whatever that issue. It could flag us. We could use it as a tip service. Then we would deploy a reporter. So I could see some potential benefits for us in AI, but it's we're in a scary place right now.
I also have an opposite reaction to this of some of the good things. There are some good things that can happen with AI. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was also I'm just gonna chime in. I think that the thought about the law catching up to the technology.
Yeah.
I think that's the one that scares me the most. Maybe that's because I'm a political scientist and this is kind of what I do. But I think one of the things we're seeing, right, is we don't even know who is defining the risks right now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The risks and the content of the policy discussions seems to be largely driven by the companies that are producing and driving innovation in AI. And that's not unusual in politics. Politicians aren't subject matter experts on every topic. That's what we know. And that's okay. They shouldn't be. There's no way to elect people who are subject matter experts on everything. And so they do tend to rely on experts, but the experts they're currently relying on
Yeah.
are the people that are developing these programs. I just have in my notes Fox guarding the hen house. I mean, and I think that's the thing that
Yeah.
bothers me, I think, the most. And what we're seeing, I think, increasingly is this shift away from AI regulation as a societal problem to it being an individual problem. What can I do to make sure that I'm using AI responsibly? But, and this follows. It follows from behavioral economics. It follows from so much work that this is an intentional idea from corporations to shift the onus from, shift the locus of control from them to the individual, because then they don't have to be regulated. And so, to some extent, that's, I think, a really, that's a problematic piece, and that's where the law, I just think, is not catching up to the technology.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because, when we look at who needs to be involved in this, one of the things that is really problematic with AI is the replacement of intelligence. And we have kind of an intelligence problem in America right now because people aren't valuing it as much. And our institutions, our university institutions, our colleges and universities have been under fire. And corporations and a lot of people that are providing that fire towards us are failing to realize is that we are incubators. Universities and colleges are the place where we can break things, put them together, fix it, study it, put it through the ringer, and nobody is worse for the wear for it because we're in a controlled environment. We're doing things that would not impact society. But that has been lost somewhere along the way, and that's another discussion we could spend a lot of time talking about. But, and that's why, I encourage the use in the university is to push the envelope. I encourage students to use it. I'm hopeful that we can create an engine that can identify fake news and identify falsities. The problem is the emotional part, and trying to get AI to understand biases is really difficult right now because it doesn't think like humans. All the talk about AI turning into humans and talking, to a point, but the emotional aspect of it and the ability for the technology to truly understand bias, not only bias that another entity has, but your own personal biases, that's something AI can't do. AI can't tell you what your bias is unless it gets to know you, which is a whole other scary component.
And it has its own biases.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's fantastic people in the language department at DU who are, I'm on the committee that has been funding some research into AI. And there's people in the language department looking at the way that translation services, specifically Arabic translation services, translate into dominant dialects, and what that does in terms of sort of privileging already dominant languages and language dialects. So I mean, it's not perfect. I think there's assumption, but it's not. And it has those biases built in, and I don't know how do we fix that.
It's hard because we've been doing it for centuries. I mean, and all of our written texts have that in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even when it comes down to I was just reading this today, the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
It's been changed in Roman and independent of the dialects. The J letter was not even around during that time. So they had to switch some things around. And that dialect and the translation gets changed over time.
That's why they called him Jesus originally.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I think his name originally, what they're saying, a lot of scholars are saying that his name was Jacob, the Hebrew name of Jacob. And not necessarily with a J, it was with a Y-E-A. Yeah, so, those sorts of things have been going. I mean, I always tell my students that fake news existed since they were writing on cave walls. Big fish stories, Did you see that caribou? It had the biggest rack in the world. It's like, I don't think so. But, yeah.
All right. Thank you all for that. The next question addresses the loss of local news. So, Mr. Rickman, we've learned about the demise of local news and the rise in corporate control of media in Denver and Colorado. We've seen how those trends are rending the fabric of our relationships, communities, and democracy. Can you share your concerns about recent and impending changes to Denver and Colorado media and share what we can do to protect these very valuable assets?
Boy, how much time we got here? I mean, look, you guys probably already know some of this. I mean, we've lost something like 2,000 plus newspapers in the past 20 years across the country. Here in Colorado, 52 closed between 2004 and 2023, 52 here just in Colorado, with 19 of those closing between 2019 and 2023. So this process is accelerating. And since 2023, we've lost a dozen more. And there's an old saying from Tip O'Neill. Maybe you guys remember him. He's former Speaker of the U.S. House, who famously said, all politics is local. It's not anymore. All politics is national, which is why you see, politicians. I'm not naming names, but you know who I'm talking about here. Whoever can say the most outrageous thing winds up on Fox News or on MSNBC, for that matter. And we've lost, and we've talked about it here some already, the connections, that tie us together as communities. This brief anecdote, I spent a little bit of time at the Greeley Tribune as the city editor, and I picked up the phone one day in the newsroom, and it was a grandmother who was calling. She was so excited because her grandson, her latest grandson, had just become an Eagle Scout. And all of her sons were Eagle Scouts, and now all of her grandsons were Eagle Scouts. And she was so thrilled. She wanted to share this with her newspaper, with her community. And that's just gone away. Those things are going away. I saw your kid in the front of the sports section, in the football game. All of those things go away when newspapers close. Out in the Eastern Plains, Alden Global Capital, the hedge fund that owns the Denver Post and 100 plus other newspapers across the country. They've closed down a number of newspapers out in the Eastern Plains. Communities that had newspapers for 100 years, they're just gone. And where do people turn for trusted sources of information? People just do not know. The Denver Post, where I was in 2018, I was senior editor at the Denver Post. At its height, the Denver Post had 307 journalists in the newsroom. By 2018, we were down to about 100. We were ordered to leave our building at the corner of Colfax and Broadway, across from the state capitol. Many of us thought better to lose a building than to lose people, if this saves jobs. And then just a few weeks later, the hedge fund said, by the way, cut another third of the staff. And that's when I decided that there had to be a better way. That Colorado deserved more than hedge funds are willing to give us. So what we've seen across the state is Alden Global Capital and by the way, the Denver Post is down to around 50 or so. And they're in the middle of a tough budget season right now, so fingers crossed for them. But Alden owns a number of papers across the state. Gannett, another hedge fund controlled entity, owns the Fort Collins Coloradoan and the Pueblo Chieftain. Once upon a time, the Fort Collins Coloradoan, had a newsroom, that was roughly, this crowd here. They could practically fit at this table now. And, for me, it's not, I'm sorry for anyone who loses a job, but the journalists I know are smart, capable, ambitious people. They go find other jobs. In many cases, they go make more money doing something else. But the tragedy is we'll never know the stories that weren't told because there wasn't a journalist there to tell them. The corrupt officials who aren't being held accountable, the good people in our communities who aren't being celebrated, the Eagle Scouts, those kinds of stories connect us as communities. So to me, look, the hedge funds control most of the newspapers across the country, and they have identified them as distressed properties. They will do what hedge funds do. They sell off the real estate, they jack up the subscription costs. They shrink the physical size of the newspaper. Again, they cut the staff, and they cut and cut and cut. I often point to the Salinas Californian, birthplace of John Steinbeck. It's owned by Gannett. Last I checked, there were 0 local reporters at the Salinas Californian. The only local content, and you can't even make this up, death notices. That's what the future looks like with hedge fund ownership of newspapers. They will cut and cut and cut until there's nothing left to cut and nobody is left to subscribe to the paper. And to me, so that's, sorry to be a downer here, but and there's a lot to mourn. But I'm also excited about the future. I look around and I see an evolving media landscape, and not just the Colorado Sun, although I'm very proud of what we do, but I've seen a number of upstart media organizations pop up around the state and around the country. Texas Tribune, another nonprofit newsroom, is doing great work. They cover the Texas State Capitol and cover politics and policy, and they're doing really admirable work. There are a number of others that are popping up. And look, the old model is dying before our eyes. And to me, I mourn that loss, but it's inevitable at this point. And I don't think there's any stopping that trend. So I think what can we do is, we can be discerning news consumers, find reputable news organizations that are worthy of your support, and lean hard into that. I mean, for us at the Colorado Sun, again, I'm proud that we have lasted 8 years, and not just lasted, but thrived, and we've grown. But we're a big old state of 6 million people. There's still a lot of people who don't know about us. And like any new business, growing awareness of our brand and our name and our product is a big challenge. So what you all can do as consumers, and this isn't a plug for the Sun, although if you want to read us, please do, is you find reputable sources, share them with each other, contribute if you can. But it doesn't have to be giving them money. There are lots of other ways to help. Sharing stories that you found interesting or informative, with your family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, et cetera. Word of mouth is one of the most effective ways of sharing these kinds of things. You trust your family and your friends and your neighbors more than you do, some random person you see on TV.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to make a comment on that?
I'll go just real quick. I'll go ahead and plug for you. I'll tell everybody here.
Thank you. I did not pay him either.
No. I just say to subscribe to something that you trust, and subscribe to something that's local. I remember growing up, and we'd have the paper delivered to our house, and I think my family paid 25 cents for a paper, and that's through inflation. We're talking a little bit more than that now, but. For the price of a Starbucks coffee, you can have a subscription to a local service that you can trust and that can bring some news to you. I'm not saying that all free news is bad, but you have to put some value on what it is that you're getting. We went from newspapers and magazines and paying freely for those as a society to everything suddenly being for free on the internet. And that was problematic, and that's another thing we can talk about for hours and hours and hours of what really happened to news and media is offering things for free. And now it's clouded in all other things that are free that are misrepresenting or not actually journalists, or, they're journalists, but they're really media, that media part that Bob was talking about. So I'll give you the plug.
We definitely could have that debate all night about free versus paid. So for instance, one of the things, I think what we're talking about here are a lot of particularly legacy news organizations have paywalls.
Yeah.
So you can read 3 stories a month or 5 stories a month or something like that, and then you have to pay up. There were a lot of people, again, when we launched 8 years ago, there were smart people who said, you got to have a paywall. All the cool kids have paywalls. You got to do it. And we decided to go another way. I mean, you were right. There's an argument to be made that we're inadvertently signaling that our work has no value. But I don't actually believe that. To me, I trust our readers. We're not really in the page view business at the Colorado Sun the way maybe I was at the Denver Post. We're in the loyalty business, and we either prove our value to readers and they can choose to pay us voluntarily. Our mission statement is news is a public good, and everyone deserves access to news, whether they can afford to pay for it or not. Like, we all benefit when we are well-informed, when our neighbors are well-informed, which is why we share our content, again, with dozens of news organizations across the state, because we very much believe in that mission.
Pay what you can models. Or
Pay what you can, and it works. I mean, for us,
It's great.
knocking on wood here.
Yeah. 25 years ago, when I was at the Poynter Institute in Florida, we worked with journalists across the country and around the world on everything from reporting to management to ethics to design and so forth. I remember one of my colleagues and I sitting around chewing on this at the dawn of the internet still then, saying that newspapers would need a new business model, but they were at least a decade away. Well, by 2010, it was 15 years away. By 2026, the business model for newspapers in general may still be at least another decade away. Ones like what Larry and his colleagues are doing, or Texas Tribune and others, have created a different form of a business model and a micro approach to it in a way that asks us as consumers and citizens to be investors, to be investors. And as we go through our lives, we make choices about where we are going to invest. We may put some money into savings account or stocks or whatever because we ask for a return on that, financial in that case. We put something into our children, our grandchildren, our nieces and our nephews, both saving money for them, but also helping them deal with the tough issues in life to grow up. We're investing in them, right? Because we have hope in the next generation. If we want good, meaningful, substantive, ethical journalism in our society, we have to invest in it. It used to be that newspapers, what was it, 2/3 at least, maybe 3/4 in many instances of the revenue came from advertising. It diminished and it diminished and it diminished for a variety of factors over the last 30 years or so. If we as citizens, consumers, don't invest in good news reporting, we won't have it. Pure and simple. Pure and simple.
And what's great about local news is that trust is really expensive these days, but generationally, across the board, with the young and the old, there is trust in local news. And that's sort of priceless. Yes, it's diminished compared to previous generations, but the fact that it is so accepted and beloved is a testament.
Thank you. Next, we're going to talk about our younger generation. A recent data essay from December 2025, published by the Pew Research Institute, reported that young adults under 30 follow news less closely than any other age group. And when it comes to political news, Pew reports that 70% of young adults say that they get their news just when they happen to come across it, generally online and often on social media outlets like TikTok or Instagram, or from influencers in podcasts or Substacks. Dr. Kalika, this question goes to you. How do you see these trends impacting our elections and our democracy? And how can we help our young people get credible, nonpartisan information so that they can participate meaningfully in the democratic process?
It's a big question. So let's set the stage here. So 63% of news influencers, of where youth get their news from, which is about 37%, are male and they're right-leaning. Just think about that. Visualize that. And 21% of all U.S. adults get their news from social media. So this is an area that we can no longer ignore, and we cannot ignore the void that exists if our youth are getting, a good amount of them are getting their news from these spaces. So then you have to think about sort of the pros and the cons of like, how can social media impact democracy and elections? Well, you have the good, which is political organizing. It's a really fun tool to try to get the kids involved in, maybe volunteering for polls, going to a protest, or just joining groups of like-minded people. And the algorithm can sometimes put you in there, right? Like if you really like plants, TikTok will put you with the plant people in the plant community, and they do so with political ideology. But then there's also the bad, right? So you have easy access. You don't have paywalls most of the time. You are paying with your information that you're giving out freely. But you are then locked into perhaps an echo chamber where everything that you're seeing is something that you already know or already believe, and people are gaining your trust, which is so valuable today, that don't necessarily deserve it. People can play or pretend to be journalists when they are in fact media, like the panel was talking about. And the youth don't really care or want to even define who a journalist is anymore or what journalism is anymore. But then there's the good, where you can get like-minded people together, let's say in a BTS fandom, and they can buy tickets to a political candidate's rally and sell it out and not show up. But then there's the bad, like disinformation. And that's very different than misinformation, right? Because with disinformation, there's intent. There's intent to deceive and to give you bad information. And they have a system, right, these news influencers, where they build on top of each other. And they'll give you maybe 4 or 5 real things that exist, or facts, or information that can benefit your life in order to hook you. But maybe the 5th or 6th thing is a lie, a complete, utter lie, for whatever purpose they have, right? For political acumen, to sell you a subscription, or to get you in the manosphere. Anyone know what a manosphere is here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the Matrix. It's the red pill. It's a place where a lot of disinformation, racism, and misogyny thrive. And so you have a place where speech is not chilled in theory, except that it's all managed by algorithms. And sometimes you get lucky and you find your people, and you find good news sources, and you find legacy media, or sometimes you're sort of sucked into these silos where all you're doing is sort of becoming essentially brainwashed and misled and manipulated by influencers.
All right. Anybody want to add anything to that?
So I'm not on the sort of the algorithms. I 100% agree. I won't say this is a defense of our young people, but I will say that I think one of the questions we have to ask is, why should they follow political news? Mm-hmm. The average age of a U.S. senator is 64 years old. The average House member is 57.5. The last 3 presidents were 70, 78, and 78 when they were elected. The youthful Converse-wearing Kamala Harris was 59 when she ran for president. There is 1 Gen Z member in the U.S. House of Representatives and 26 Gen Z members in all of the state legislatures, 7,386 seats in state legislatures. 0.35% of state legislators are Gen Z. Can we blame them? That they, even when they are interested and involved, the parties and the politicians are not responsive to their concerns. And so, yes, we would love for them to be engaged and interested and reading the news and doing all that, but we also need to hold politicians accountable to follow through. I'm sure you've all asked students variations of this. I ask my students how many of them expect to be able to retire and receive Social Security. 3, 4 in a class might raise their hand. How many think they will buy a home at some point? They all raise their hands that they want to. Less than a dozen in a class of 50 or 60 might think that they will ever own a home. I don't know that we can blame them totally for not being that politically involved. The parties haven't done anything. The politicians haven't done anything to show that they are responsive to their needs.
Go ahead, no, please.
I completely agree. Just like millennials were sort of pushed aside for positions of power or influence, the next thing is it's going to happen to Gen Z or is already happening. This is the most hopeless group of students I've had this semester in terms of having no expectation of being able to afford children, or seeing marriage as a valid or option in their future for various reasons. So as there is a downside sort of for this political activism, the upside, though, is that they're one of the most socially informed groups of a generation that I've seen, especially compared to when I was in college, in terms of just understanding the difference between equity and equality and structural racism. So they are really informed, even though technically the latest report is that their IQ points have gone down generationally compared to millennials, but it depends on how you measure IQ. But exactly, we're holding them to standards that don't necessarily make sense given the completely new reality that they're being presented with.
I just wanted to touch a little bit, and I'm not going to lay this all on social media. It kind of goes back to the comments you made earlier about foreign influences. You know, again, back to the 2016 election and Russia's desire to, I don't think they really cared that much about which candidate to support. It was really about encouraging cynicism of, you know, that they're all rotten, you know, all of them are bad, and that you shouldn't even bother voting. What's the point? And Bob, you made a reference to cynicism versus skepticism. What we're seeing more and more is that cynicism. And so I spent almost 4 years in Russia as a Moscow correspondent for Associated Press. I helped cover the fall of the Soviet Union. And you know, for generations, Soviet citizens were fed a steady diet of state-sponsored media. Right, so the two big publications in the Soviet Union were Pravda, which means truth, and Izvestia, which means news. And it's one of the things I loved about the Russian people. Their cynicism was, there's no truth in Pravda, and there's no news in Izvestia. Like, they very much knew to be cynical and not skeptical. And I worry that, you know, I'm seeing more of that in this country, where people just like, what's the difference? The Dems are the same as the Republicans, and why should I even bother voting if they're all the same? And that is exactly what Putin was trying to, and I'm not saying he's, you know, it's all him, it's not, but that's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, and it's in addition to all of these outward influences that are impacting the youth, and it's also us. You know, and you know, as much as our students want to be on their own, and there's a bit of rebellion in there, they're soaking up everything we're doing right now. And when we talk about accountability, and we take a closer look at those who are responsible for things in our society, and the lack of accountability that's out there, it's despicable. Yeah. When was the last time you heard anybody in power say sorry, apologize, or say, you know, that was the wrong decision to make, how can I fix it? You know, I have faculty members who do things that are absolutely archaic and wrong, and instead of coming up to me and saying, hey, I'm sorry I did that, what can I do to improve it? They say, I've been doing this for years, what's the problem? And so it's no wonder that there's this cynicism that's happening. Now, it can change, and we can change it, and they're very receptive to that change, particularly when it's positive. I tried something in my classroom last semester where I owned up to things. You know, I got to a point where I have on my syllabus, so I'll have things graded in by 2 weeks, and I didn't. And I came in my classroom and I apologized to them. And I said, I dropped the ball. I am sorry. I had a student that came up to me afterwards and said, I was the first person to ever apologize to them in their life. This is somebody who's between 18, 21, 22 years old. Nobody's ever said sorry to them. Nobody had ever had accountability in their lives. That's tough, you know. So the best thing that we could do is start taking accountability and show, not just the youth, to show each other that we take accountability. There's so much power in saying I'm sorry, you know, and people are so receptive to that. But somehow, I think from a societal perspective, and a lot of our leaders have forgotten that aspect.
Damn, that's hard in our country when you have a president that's never once said, I'm wrong, or I'm sorry.
It's not just, I know.
Where do we, you know, and I agree with Phil's point, Angelica, of the younger generation. I'm, by a good number of years, the oldest person sitting up here on the edge of being an octogenarian. It's time for us not only to get the hell out of the Senate and out of the House, at people my age and younger, even down into the 60s, but I don't think we should step into the mortuary at this point. We need to be active in some way of engaging with the younger generations by asking questions, by prompting conversation, by exploring what's in their minds and what's in their hearts, and not just disappear from it. Some of the senators and Congress people, I think, disappearing might not be a bad idea. But I think ideally, as we grow older, we create some wisdom. Some of that wisdom comes from the stupid things we've done and the mistakes we've made. But it's also enough that we should stay in the arena of participating in consumption of journalism, the arena in helping the next generations become even better as they grow older. So I hope that we can do that in some process along the way.
Yeah, and I've really been thinking a lot about this lately. I was in San Francisco a couple weeks ago for a conference that was dedicated to solutions journalism. And the notion is, you know, in journalism, we're great at writing about bad things that happen, right? You know, we write about all the planes that crash, not about the ones that land, right? So there's a lot of despair. And like the young woman I referenced at CU, she's not wrong about that. We're really good at, and frankly, we've been talking about problems up here tonight. You know, but the notion of solutions journalism is, well, that's just half of it. You know, are there potential solutions? What can we do about it? Bob, you made reference to this. You know, I've got friends who said, I just had to turn off the news. I don't want to hear Trump's voice anymore, or I don't want to read about war. You know, it's overwhelming for me. I had to turn off the news. And, you know, I said, look, we need you. Like, society needs you to be engaged. You know, let's find ways, maybe small ways, to make our world a little better when it comes to kids and media, or kids, or younger people, and, well, kids, with media consumption. Is media literacy, is that something that, you know, should be begun in elementary school and right on up, you know, through middle and high school and college? You know, I think there's a giant media literacy gap, but to me, I really want to be focused on, I'm a fundamental optimist. I really think we're going to figure things out. But I think we need to figure out not just the problems here, but how we might address them as a society and as individuals.
Well said.
Can I ask a question? Do you think there's actually a media literacy gap? Or do you think that just everyone lacks media literacy with a changing media environment?
Oh,
I'm not sure it's like a generational thing.
No, I'm not. I don't want to suggest it's a generational thing, but I think you've got to start someplace.
Yeah.
And I think yes. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, all of us are overwhelmed with a fire hose of information, misinformation, disinformation. It's hard to sort out what we can trust and what not. So I agree with you, but I'm just as a small thing to me, if we could, have some media literacy in schools, I think that would be a decent first step.
Well, and 50, 60, 70 of you are here tonight. This is about media literacy, let's face it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
Thank you
you're-
for coming,
you're
really.
ideally
Yeah.
growing and learning, and for the League of Women Voters to create this kind of constant pathway to knowing more, understanding more, grappling with, struggling with these issues. That's all part of that literacy. You're quite right, Phil.
And I think there's a natural literacy gap when we're talking about AI. Talk about any technology that gets thrust upon society. Every communication technology that we've ever had has been under some form of scrutiny. The printing press was going to be blasphemous against the word of Christ. You had television that was going to disrupt the minds of kids and games and all that. Every form of media has had, or every form of communication tool, I should say, or technology that we use for communication, and this is AI included, goes through a process where we adapt to it. And that learning that takes place is as slow sometimes as the law. We wait for the law to catch up to it, but our ability to adapt is sometimes just as slow because we're trying to figure it out. And we are trying to figure out what the impacts are. That's why we have specialists in there and we have people that research the impact on youth. That's why we have political analysts that look at how the overall world impacts. And that's why we have people that deliver that information out to everybody. But we have a tool right now, like the internet, like everything that came before it, that we're trying to figure out. And we have the ability to adapt to it. And we also have the ability to unplug it. One of the biggest non-issues or non-discussions about AI is its impact on the environment. China just submerged a couple of AI server clusters underwater to see if it can not only do a better job of cooling the system, but use the water in a way that doesn't damage the water and that doesn't make it unusable again, which it is great. Those are things on that side. But just as those environmental impacts are being looked at, we'll learn from this. And it's like riding a bike. I scraped my knee, I fell, I learned how to tuck and roll, and it took practice, and we're gonna scrape our knee quite a bit on this. And it's gonna hurt a little bit before it gets better, but I'm hopeful that it's gonna get better. I think that we can train AI to do good things.
Getting your pant leg out of the bike chain is always a pain in the ass.
I know.
That was the worst.
Yeah.
Well, again, we've talked about this a little bit already, but it's on all of us to be savvy news consumers. And I use food a lot when I talk about news, so forgive me. But like the old legacy newspaper was like Safeway or King Soopers, right? You go in and you can find a little bit, find some sports over here, some business over here, the comics here, et cetera, and you throw it in your basket. That is, it's going away. To me, the media landscape is looking a lot more like, I lived in New York for a while. It looks like my old neighborhood in Brooklyn, where if you want really great cheese, you go to the cheese shop. If you really want a great steak, you go to the butcher. You go pick up great bread from the baker, et cetera. And it's a lot more work, but at the end of that shopping trip, the quality of the goods was much higher than I would have gotten from the supermarket. And as I look around, I see Chalkbeat doing really good work covering education. I see The Athletic doing a pretty good job of covering sports. Again, it's up to you to find trusted sources of information, but it's hard work. It's harder than just rolling into Safeway and filling up your cart. It's going to be more of a challenge for all of us. It already is.
Thank you. All right, we have one more for you, Dr. Kalika, that was submitted by an audience member before we met this evening. So many 18 to 24-year-olds today grew up with the latest generation of Xbox games and Avatar fantasy movies. Looking at this generation through a neuroscience lens, might some of them not register the significance of a label AI generated on a deepfake photo, video, or audio track? Is it possible they would not see why that label is important when reaching a decision on a candidate for office or on a ballot measure?
So I think it's important to think about, right, politics versus pop culture, but then there's these, intersectionalities of that so much that we've seen, I think, more with the current administration than previous, given that he was also a reality show star. So sometimes they don't care that it's AI. For instance, Victoria Beckham famously danced with her son at his wedding. And there was, these rumors and reports that it was an inappropriate dance. So the internet went wild with AI. They said, ooh, let's just sort of envision what this could possibly look like. And so viral AI video after viral AI video was spread around. And a lot of, 18 to 29-year-olds just didn't care that it was AI. And they kept sharing it because of the entertainment value within it, right? Just the thought of how absurd this possible dance with this former Spice Girl and her son could possibly be, because she might have not liked the woman he married. But that's just one example of there is sort of this apathy, like the panel was discussing, of, well, maybe nothing is real and everything is AI, but also there's issues with generations and AI use. And so those who use it more report, and those who are younger report that they can spot it at a much higher rate than their parents, let's say, who are not using it or not using it often in the same way. And you have sort of different impacts on how it manipulates. So for younger generations, it's going to manipulate your emotions. And so there are horrible statistics out there of teens and young adults using AI chatbots and really thinking that it's almost human or real, and it leading them down to a path of mental health issues and suicide or suicide ideation. And then for their parents, though, if they use AI, the manipulation is in form of misinformation. And spotting it, again, teens, young adults, statistically can spot it higher and are more likely to go and fact check it than their parents or their grandparents. So if they're more likely to recognize AI, then I would worry more about their parents and grandparents than necessarily youth in terms of scams and not just misinformation, but disinformation. It's about sort of taking accountability and saying, how am I going to fact check? But then that goes back to the panel saying with this concept of media literacy. And just all of us as a society catching up. I mean, even in academia, we're just catching our breath barely with how to deal with AI. What is the appropriate use of AI? The ethics, the environment of AI. So I think the best way to say this is that there are no more adults in the room. Okay, that we are in no regulation land. We have barely even thought about regulating the internet, and Congress really understanding how it's used today in terms of copyright and liability, and again, putting liability back on the consumer constantly. They haven't even, I mean, they're a billion years away from AI regulation, okay, in terms of identifying it, having artists, get any kind of payout for its use, or journalists, or academics, because they're using all of our collective knowledge, and they are making a product out of it. So For the youth, emotions. That's what we really have to worry about, and their mental health in AI use. But we have to be very cognizant generationally, across all generations, of how it's impacting us and how each of us are using it differently and how we are vulnerable to it.
Can I also add, I think that the university piece is a really important piece. In that faculty, I think faculty are trying to catch up and figure things out. But there's a very problematic component to this, which is our universities are under immense threat from the federal government in terms of funding and in terms of a lack of visas for international students who often pay a higher percentage of tuition. And what we're seeing, DU is not an exception, is upper administration leaning into being AI leaders, thinking that this is the way forward. And it might be, but there's this, I think there's and we're also dealing with just lower levels of belief and trust in higher education. And so we've got this kind of weird inflection moment where faculty are really trying to figure out, like, okay, what do we do? How do we teach with it? How do we keep students from, we all are facing this, right? How do we understand what they're using, what they're not using? And then we have our institutions often leaning in and saying, like, well, let's figure out how to do this well and ethically. And I think a lot of that institutional response is in response to funding cuts and thinking that this might be a way to bring in outside funding. But
Yeah.
I think there's a real risk that if you do that, and if this is funded through people who, again, want AI to succeed, are they really going to be likely to fund grants that say, actually, this whole thing is a sham, or actually this whole thing is going to destroy the earth? Like, I'm not sure they are. I don't think they will.
CU has just spent $2 million partnering with ChatGPT.
Yep.
There's an uprising amongst the faculty on incorporating student use, and they just announced today that they will be delaying it to August 2026, but faculty implementation and where we have the fancy paid service will start at the end of March. Right now, we have no AI policy on campus. We have no mechanisms for actually testing if it is AI or not. And students are suing faculty and universities if they are charged with submitting something that is AI and getting an F. So that just leaves us with looking at the content at the end of the day and saying, is this good work? And AI is not good at critical
Nope.
thinking.
Not yet.
It's real bad.
Not yet.
Not
It's
yet.
going, it is moving so fast in ways that all of us who are working in these areas every day are still amazed, shocked, and horrified with its implementation and use. Now, there's also the other pressure of jobs. And students feeling very pessimistic about the job market, like I think they should be. But also jobs saying, well, I want AI natives. I want someone who has used AI to such an extent, incorporated in their daily work ethic, now that they can do 5 jobs at once. So how do I think of the ethics, the academics, and now preparing them also for a job market that is in complete flux? And it feels like we're on a precipice of 2008 all again, where I graduated into a world that did not want me. And millennials were faced with, a terrible job market. And the world, turning upside down. And is AI the next step there? Unless we get some people in power who can understand it.
The thing I really worry about as we head into midterm elections and the presidential election a couple of years after that is, we all know the saying, picture's worth 1,000 words. We don't know if we can trust that, never mind pictures, but, videos. I don't know if you saw the news, Val Kilmer, actor who died not so long ago, is going to be coming out in a new movie. and it's entirely AI generated. That, you know, his family gave permission to use his likeness and whatnot, and it's Val Kilmer starring in a movie that he never acted in. And if they can do that, and apparently quite well, who's to say? I mean, we, as a news organization, people will share videos with us, and look what Lauren Boebert said, you know, last week, and, you know, look how outrageous this is. And is it true? You know, did it really happen? It's going to get tougher and tougher for news organizations and for all of us to judge whether this is a real thing. It used to be videos like, well, we got the receipts here. It's all, she said it, it's, you know, we can't say that with certainty anymore. And that's scary for me.
And a little light at the end of the tunnel, that's the first thing that the Copyright Office has looked at. And it's actually really interesting because it's where copyright laws and where we have privacy laws colliding. Because, you know, the digital replicas is part one of the policy that they're trying to create for AI in the Copyright Office. And that goes to those deep fake videos and images or voice likenesses. So right now they're putting it to be against the law for anybody to do a likeness, not just of famous people, but anybody. It's illegal to make a digital replica of any, or will be illegal for anybody to make a digital replica without the permission. So they have Val Kilmer's family's permission, not Val Kilmer, but his family, you know, the state, so they can maybe, I don't know. I won't pontificate or anything, but you know, it's interesting because that was the first. They didn't go for copyright in general at first. They went for the deep fake. And that's an important distinction here. The Copyright Office approached AI and the topic of deepfakes before they actually talked about what's copyrightable and what's not. That's really important, and that's something hopefully that will speed up. Again, I spoke earlier that the law takes a long time to catch up, and hopefully we can change a little bit of that in these cases. But you know, there are some things that are working in our favor, and it's going to take all of us to pay attention. It's going to take all of us to really have these open discussions and have more of these community discussions right here, and go to the library, spend more time at the library and learn there, and go to those community spaces, because that's really, libraries are becoming that central community hub. And we can have face-to-face conversations still.
Thank you. Now we're going to have a more generic question to each of you, and it's on AI. AI threatens to infiltrate every area of our lives, and I'd like each panelist to weigh in on how they see it impacting their area of expertise, either positively, negatively, or both, and what policy options might we explore to help manage it effectively. So Dr. Chin, we'll start with you, and specifically, how do you see AI impacting political polarization in America?
You know, I think that AI is interesting in this realm because, yes, it makes it easier to polarize people and drive people apart, but that was already really very easy. It's not, I mean, like, it's slightly faster, I guess, with AI, but we were polarizing for decades. I'm not sure that AI is the thing that's driving polarization. I think it makes it easier, but it wasn't that hard in the first place. But my worry about AI as it relates to polarization is that is still ultimately a technological one, which is we don't really know what is. If you wanted to use AI to create political polarization, you didn't need AI to do that. But it might be feeding polarization in a way that we don't even notice, because we don't know what these models are learning off of. We don't know what the safeguards are for foreign influence or domestic influence. We don't even know if everyone is getting the same information when they look and they Google something and they get an AI overview. And so I did a little test. What is good and bad about the estate tax? And I got a bunch of different things. And I also did what is good and bad about the death tax. Same thing, just framing. And you get different responses, right? You get talking about the specific caps, the exemptions. You get, it generates lots of revenue for the government. And then you get, but it also has estates that go over the exemption face rates up to 40%. But you also get really interesting things about the ways that the nature of the information that is portrayed and whether that information is actually accurate. Google loves to tell you that one of the cons of the estate tax is double taxation. Assets are taxed when you earn and then also when they are transferred. On a $5 to $10 million estate, I think the estimates put about a third of those estates usually are unrealized capital gains. So that's not taxed. That is not double taxation. They love to talk about, and this is because this is what is in the discussion around the estate tax, which it's drawing the information from. They love to talk about the fact that family farms will be sold or cannot survive with the estate tax. The USDA, not the tax institute, the USDA, 0.3% of all farms that were transferred in 2002 were even subject to the estate tax. 87, not 87%, 87 of them, of all of the farms passed in 2002. It's a minuscule number, and that doesn't mean that the farm went out of business, it just means that they had to pay some estate tax. We don't know the information that's going in, and we see these AI summaries and things like that in just our everyday sort of Google searches. And so I think there's a real risk that the information that comes out of these chatbots or these AI assistants on Google, people think, I Googled it, I found some information, it came up, it must be true. It doesn't have to be true. And if you change the search terms just a little, and that's a reflection of polarization because we use different terms for different things based on how polarized we are, it's going to create different types of information and exacerbate that polarization. So can it be used nefariously? Sure, but that was already easy. It was already easy to polarize people. Where it is, I think, really concerning in terms of polarization is in the ways that we don't even know that it's polarizing us or giving us information.
Thank you. Mr. Steele, how will AI affect the practice of journalism and journalists going forward?
I was kind of hoping you'd change the question to how are the Chicago Cubs going to do this year? More my interest, actually. I remember back about 1990 or 1991, we held a conference at the Poynter Institute where I was in the faculty at the time, focusing on digital technology and the ongoing concerns about digital alteration, manipulation of photographs. Yeah. Some of you that have been around for a while remember one of the big issues at that time was a National Geographic cover in which they had moved one of the great pyramids in Egypt in order to fit the design of the National Geographic cover. And then there were 3 or 4 other pretty significant digital alteration questions. We invited Hal Buell from the AP, who was then, I think, the director of photography, is my recollection, a very wise, sharp, experienced, skilled, pleasant chap, to be there and talk about this. And I'm paraphrasing him, but when we posed the overriding question of how will digital alteration, manipulation of photos affect the practice of journalism and therefore the consumption of journalism, he said it's like an avalanche coming down the mountain. And he was right. Now, I think generally in journalism, good news organizations got a hold of this concern pretty quickly and put some practices, ethical standards in place in order to minimize those concerns. It didn't get rid of all the problems, but there was a way to put your hands on the tiller, to mix metaphors here, of how to deal with that. I would suggest that the AI situation when it comes to journalism, and we've already talked about it pretty significantly here, is much more than an avalanche coming down the mountain. I think it's a Category 5 hurricane combined with an 8.0 earthquake. Now, that may be a bit of hyperbole, but as we've talked about here, these challenges, because they're not just newsroom challenges and the technology of the editing, for instance, along the way, or a few nefarious people to have the skills to start mixing and changing imagery, but it's a societal issue of profound proportions. And it is a huge financial issue in our country. I don't know whether we'll have time to talk about it, but I'm fascinated by this whole issue and concerned by the whole issue of the Pentagon and saying to, do you pronounce Anthropic, the company? Anthropic of Claude AI, which I happen to think personally, with limited exposure to it, is one of the better, if not the best of the AIs, in my opinion. But the Pentagon basically threw out Anthropic from working with the Pentagon and the federal government, my understanding is, because Anthropic pushed back on the Pentagon in terms of how the federal government, the Pentagon, and the administration was going to use AI in terms of war games and actual war activity and action. That's my understanding of it. Is that a fair thing? You know, and you know, holy shit. You know, if you'll accept my words there in terms of that, of what's going on. And that's not, in this particular moment, a condemnation of this particular administration, although it is their action. It's, wow, you know, what's going on that humongous scale, politically, societally, governmentally, narcissistically, all of those things, in terms of leadership and what they're saying to that company that said, we're not going to do this because it goes against our principles, standards, and our ethical position of how it should be used in this way. That's real scary. And then it comes to the journalists at the Times and the Wall Street Journal and NBC and Fox News and everybody else. How do you report on that? How do you have the knowledge to dive deep enough into this issue to be able to report it with a high level of validity and reliability when a lot of people aren't talking on the record? There's an extra pressure point of great significance. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. This question goes to Dr. Jennings and Dr. Kalika. How do you see AI affecting education in your department and in your university?
So in education, in almost every class I teach, I assign coded bias. And it's based, now there's a book from Joy from an MIT lab researched saying that everything in AI is basically biased because AI reflects society, and many times it reflects the worst of society. So if we have systematic racism, if we have bad data, that's what's being fed into these AI systems. And it's not just us chatting with a bot, it's our government, it's our towns, it's all these companies incorporating it to help them make decisions. So, are you going to get a mortgage? Are you going to get parole? Recidivism rates? Are you going to get government help? Is your university going to get funded? Really big decisions that you would want human beings involved in are now putting into these biased algorithms. And so if we're, as a society, going to rely on that, and if that's going to be the basis of all knowledge, how is that going to affect just truth and education and our youth? And are we going to be then fact-checking our news organizations with these biased AI systems that can be altered and controlled by big tech? So we used to just talk about media companies controlling the narrative and Disney taking over and Fox back in the day, and then Disney bought Fox, but only just, most of it just, they didn't buy that, Fox News part. Right, and so just like conglomerates, but now it's big tech taking over the media conglomerates. So big tech is not only just taking over and controlling our media, but it's also controlling how we communicate and what we communicate and what we're thinking now through AI and the decision making. We're very lucky with Anthropic having some kind of ethical basis. But are they but are they legally required to be ethical?
No.
Is Meta legally required to be ethical and care about your kids and what your kids are looking at? No, we have nothing. And so it impacts truth-seeking, research, and importantly, not only where we can seek information, but at what point do kids, again, if I'm here from the youth perspective, want and who they trust? So raise your hand real quick with if you know someone who's young. Congratulations, you are an influencer. And I say that because if you're going to rank trust, the youth trust you, their peers, their family, and adults above all this other bullshit. Above the technology, above the noise. And so like Bob was saying in the panel, you're the first place they're gonna go to. You are the most important information AI system that they could possibly interact with. So, I mean, that's the note I want to leave it on, is in a world full of bias, at the end of the day, they're going to come to you for meaning and context and your lived experience. And they're going to trust that above everything else. So congratulations.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's an excellent point, and really, my side of it is more of for education. The statistics out there on information in general that's out there, whether it's on the internet, wherever it is, we're about 50-50. The information on any reliable informational source is about 50% accurate, 50% not accurate. There's just as much bullshit out there on the internet as there is accurate information. So with that, we are teaching these technologies. It's humans teaching technology. We do not have a media problem. We do not have a technology problem. We have a human problem in using these technologies and using them at a rapid pace. And again, I say this, oftentimes we're using it without having any knowledge of how to use it. And what is systematically an issue here, but is also, something we do have some good players in here like Anthropic and a few others. There are a lot of AI companies that are doing responsible AI, and there are those that are doing it for the money. The big part of this is understanding the version of AI you're working with. And that's the hardest thing I'm getting across to students right now, and I have to get across to students. When you're working with the free version of ChatGPT, you're working with an AI engine that's pulling data from things that are about 2 or 3 years past. It's not using actually the accurate information. So those of us that use the free version of ChatGPT, you have to realize that you're not getting the most updated information out there. You have to pay for that. You get the paid version, then you're going to get some more updated information. And, with Claude, Claude's great. I agree. I think it's one of the better AI models on there. Even Claude has more capabilities when you pay for them. You have more time with it, you have more things. I use
You
Claude.
get Claudette at that point, and she's smarter than Claude.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, yes, absolutely. Claudette is amazing. And you know, I used Claudette the other day to write a graduate program, where we're proposing a graduate program. And so I took a lot of things out of this proposal and I put it into Claude. And so I say, Claude, I want you to create syllabi, activities, curriculum, and I had all of these courses named, and I had a brief description of it. But I asked Claude, I said, I only want peer-reviewed articles in the curriculum. And what it produced for me was amazing. It was amazing, but it was for that job. What would have taken me 2 months to do, it did in about 15 minutes. And it was good, and it was reliable. I mean, I still have to go over it. I mean, I'm sure there are a few things. I mean, peer-reviewed articles, I won't kid you, you all want to believe academics. I'm going to be the first maybe to tell you that not all academics are accurate either. We have a hypothesis problem in education, and it's not willing to accept that our hypothesis is wrong. And it's because it's happening in academics. So that accountability thing is not just an issue everywhere. It's an issue with some of our peers saying that I have a hypothesis, and to your point of polarization, you can prompt AI till the cows come home. And if you do it enough, it's eventually going to tell you what you want to hear.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the same thing when and I'll just say, do not use AI to create a friend, and definitely do not use AI to do any therapy for you. It's going to pull the good, it's going to pull the bad. And it's going to try to make a best assessment out of all that stuff. And eventually it's going to react how it believes humans will react. And that's been a big problem. And there's a story of somebody who written for the Atlantic, not the Athletic, but I think it was somebody was writing for a major news article. I think it might have even been, maybe it was the New York Times. But the guy wrote an article and had set up AI to be a friend, you know, like kind of like a girlfriend, and wanted to see how this would work. And the AI company actually gave this journalist a first glance at it, went down the rabbit hole, and this AI bot actually tried to convince the journalist to divorce his wife and you know, have a relationship with the AI bot after a while. And again, that was an exercise, again, going down this rabbit hole. He kept training this AI. And it wasn't just the information the AI was pulling. The AI bot kept thinking that this person was really trying to build a relationship with it. And it reacted how other people reacted online. It found sources out there. It found information of, this must be the appropriate way for me to react. So we got to know, you know, for me, the biggest struggle is getting people to know what versioning and what technology they're actually using. Because there's a big difference, and there's a big difference on the outcome that you'll have, just like the Google searches, where we go into class and say, everybody in here, get out your laptops and Google Iran. My results will be different than anybody else's, and it's all based off of your searching activity, what you have on your computer, things that you've messaged, things that you've talked about to other people. It knows all of that, and it pulls that. And that was just from a Google search before AI. Now with AI, we get all kinds of crazy stuff that's different.
Oh, yeah. I have my students open up YouTube
Gemini.
in a private browser to
Yeah.
see what the non-algorithm of YouTube viewers is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they're like, I see none of this. I was like, of course you don't. It knows you.
Oh, yeah. And it's with any of these things, Twitter, all those things. Well, I guess it's X now, but yeah. That's the challenge that we have, is there's so many different things going. It's like throw a rock up in the air and it'll land on one.
Thank you. Mr. Rickman, how might AI impact the current battle for local news?
So I'm going to try to take us from despair and fear to hope. Again, we've talked all about the dangers, and they're real. But I went through, when ChatGPT first came out, just for fun, I asked it to write a profile of myself. right? I know my own facts pretty well, and I thought, well, this will be interesting to see what happens. And it, just like that, came back with this, decent profile that was filled with inaccuracies, right? Just awards that I hadn't won. I was, blushing with, all the awards that it bestowed upon me. Like, thank you. But, and so then I said, no, that's wrong. Didn't win this award, didn't win that award, do it again. And it went back and rewrote it. And I said, all right, now cut it down to 500 words and put it in active voice. Boom, it did that. And I said, all right, now give it to me in 300 words and, a couple more tweaks. And within 5 minutes, it didn't sing, it wasn't beautifully written. It was pretty serviceable. And I thought, that's not that different from me working with an intern, to have them write a story, and for me as an editor to fact check it and kick it back to them and ask them to rewrite it again. The difference is just, it was stunningly fast. It was really remarkable. So to me, again, if used with proper guardrails, if with proper fact checking and whatnot, it could be a very powerful force for good, at least for me, to be able to do some things like that. Again, we do not allow our reporters to do what I did to myself. I could fire myself, I guess, but
They're writing your obituary in the
Yeah,
back
exactly.
room.
Claude is.
I hope they put it in
Wrote a
active.
story about
If they
yourself.
put it in active voice, I'm okay with that. I spoke earlier about the possibility of it being a force multiplier. Again, with proper fact checking and guardrails around it, I think it could very easily help us to report on things and know about things in places where I just don't have the reporters to do it. Again, Denver Post at its height had 307 journalists. I've got 28 people on my staff, right? We can only do so much. And to me, there is a scenario out there where we could use, we're testing actually right now with the Associated Press some AI tools that are doing exactly what I talked about before, taking recordings from government meetings and using that as a tip service for us. And like, wow, there's something really interesting going on in Pueblo. We should check that out. Without AI, we would not have had insight into that. And to me, I'm excited about that. Again, it's a tool like any other. It is already being used for bad purposes, but I'm hopeful that it can also be a good thing to help us be better informed with the right safeguards.
Speaks to the power of good editing, does it not?
Yes.
And the quality control, the checks and balances side. And that's where so often newspapers and television stations and networks have fallen down, because that piece of journalism has eroded significantly.
Well, when newspapers, when legacy newspapers, again, I don't mean to pick on the Denver Post. I'm rooting for my colleagues there, by the way. So one of the first, when they did big layoffs, one of the first job positions they cut were copy editors.
Yeah.
And copy editors were designed to save journalists from themselves, right? To catch errors before they landed in print. I will say one other thing, though, about AI. It could do a pretty good job of transcribing audio and whatnot. What it does not capture, cannot capture, at least not yet, is the nuance. There's clearly said in a sarcastic way, the tone, the color. There's no substitute for having a human being present and being able to say, it smelled in this way and it looked like this. And those are the kinds of things that I think humans bring value to real journalism, to real storytelling. So I think AI is already replacing some journalism jobs, and I'm sad about that, and I'm worried about that. But I don't think it's going to replace all of them. I think that there's too much that it can't do.
Can I play devil's advocate on this
Yeah,
one?
please, yeah.
Which is, I think you're right. I mean, so I'm not a very good devil's advocate if I'm just going to immediately agree. I think you're right that there are really good ways to use it. My fear is, I
I worry that this is playing into the desperation and feeding the desperation and cynicism and despair of young people. Because the jobs it can replace are those entry-level jobs in many cases that allow somebody to start off as a copy editor.
Yeah, the intern.
Start off as the intern
Yep.
who might work their way up. And if you can't get into that coming out of college, we see it in academia, right? So I hired an undergrad to do RA work. Had her, pulling statements from campaign websites. Could Claude have done that? Almost certainly. I could have said, here are the steps you could do. But Claude, actually probably in some people's minds, Claude will eventually take my job. I don't think that's true, because I think there's better things that we do that can't just be replicated by things you learn on the internet. But that's for another time. If a student wants to learn to be, maybe when they want to know if they want to go and get a PhD or do this kind of research, if we can do all of that work with AI, we're cutting off the knowledge base for young people. Yes, Claude can code really well, but how many of us in graduate school sat with our faculty members' code or their coding library or their set of texts and gave them a great literature review or a really flawless piece of code to create beautiful graphs? Yeah, Claude can do it, but we now no longer are training the next generation. And maybe that's the big disruption. Maybe that they don't need to know these things, but I don't know how they get into the field. Then we haven't thought about that, and so I absolutely agree. I think your argument about being able to cover other places, that's something I just never thought about, and it's true. But I really worry about what it does for this for Gen Z of being able to work. If those are the jobs.
It's a fair point. One of my first jobs I worked as a college student at a legacy newspaper on the sports desk. Very early in the morning, it was an afternoon newspaper. Those mostly have gone away. And I was on the sports desk, and one of the things that I was doing was working with box scores, for baseball games and whatnot. That's all being done by AI, and AI does it really fast, and that's the kind of thing that it can do really well. I've written a lot of earnings reports as a young journalist. They're very rote. The X number of dollars per share, the share price, et cetera. There's certain things that AI can do very well, and to me, okay, but we still use interns. As I said, we don't allow AI to write stories for us. I do feel very strongly about helping to bring up the next generation of journalists. But do I want to hire them to do box scores and earnings reports? I do not. No. I want to teach them, other things that, again, only a human can do, and that only a human can do well. To me, that's the challenge for us. Let's find the appropriate uses for this tool, and then let's have the humans do the things that AI can't do very well.
But the Colorado Sun is more ethical than a lot of other papers.
Well, yeah, I think we are, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
I tell my students, boots on the ground. We need eyewitnesses.
Yes.
And I don't think that will ever change. And then someone raised their hand, well, AI might evolve to be an eyewitness. But I sincerely, and then if you think about academia and qualitative, right, ethnographic research, again, witnessing human events, having someone there to give you context, like you're saying, the smells, what the feeling was, and more importantly, verifying and validating information in real time. So this is, I'd say 50% of my job right now is just to make them feel okay about the future. So that there is hope. And realistically, if we're going to talk about these entry-level jobs, it's going to be social media. And it's going to be influencers. which is why I made an influence journalism course that I'm teaching next semester. That will teach them how to be an ethical, educated news influencer if they want to go the entrepreneurial route, or to work for local media or legacy media and get them in these spaces. Because like I said in the beginning, 63% of news influencers are men and lean right. We need you out there. We need legacy media. We need nonprofit media. We need local media getting in these spaces and speaking Gen Z.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
On that note, I have to thank the panelists. That was just outstanding discourse tonight. We so appreciate it. I think we have time for one or two questions from the audience. And if you have a question, raise your hand and someone will get a microphone to you. And if you're directing your question to a specific panel member, please let them know. Anybody? I'm going to get some water while that's going.
This is for any of you. In this presentation, we learned that one of the biggest.
Mic's not on, but
What? Can you hear me?
Try this.
Use Tom.
Try this one.
Okay. Okay.
Here we go. During this presentation, we learned that one of the biggest threats to our democratic society and our democracy is the polarization of the political parties and society. And I'm just wondering, what can media do to reverse that trend of polarization, and do they have any incentive to do so?
Well, so one of the things that we try to do and I can just speak about the Colorado Sun. I mean, this is true in a lot of states, but we have a big urban-rural divide in Colorado. It's no surprise to any of us. I mean, look at the issue of wolf reintroduction. If you live along the I-25 corridor, you're probably, yeah, let's bring back the wolves. And if you live in rural areas, no way. And so the issue is we don't even talk to each other. I spoke to a guy who farms out in the Eastern Plains, and he said, we identify more with Kansas than we do with Denver. And, nobody in Denver talks to us anymore. They don't listen, the State House, et cetera. So we view part of our mission is to get Coloradans talking to each other. And, to me, that's how we try to tackle, in our small way at the Colorado Sun, to try to tackle the polarization is can we at least talk to each other? And we might not agree on, what to do with the facts, but let's agree that these are the facts. And somehow facts have become partisan, haven't they? But, we're trying to get people to talk to each other. I think I talked earlier about, the loss of connection. To me, that's one of the big problems is that we are all in our own silos. We only watch Fox, or we only watch MSNBC, or what is it called? MS Now? MS Now. Busting out of those bubbles is difficult. And that's what we can do as the media, is to try at least to get people to talk to each other.
Thank you. There's another hand down here, and we'll take maybe one or two more because we're running out of time.
So this is kind of a follow-on, and this goes to you, Dr. Chen, because this political polarization that we're seeing, and in our first session, we had everybody raise their hand if they knew people from an opposite party, and if having conversations with them was difficult or even impossible. Many people raised their hands. So how can we as individuals begin to bridge that divide with people who are not, who are in the other party, and create, conversations about things that won't stiffen the resistance, or what can we as individuals do to help bridge that, fix that?
Huge question. I'm teaching, not this next quarter, but in the fall, I'm teaching my Polarization in America class again. I don't even know how many th time. And it's always, we spend a huge chunk of the class on this, and there is no good answer because there are things we can do, but changing attitudes is one of the most difficult things we can do. And there's an article I assigned in my Intro to American Politics class, and it's about a program, was it called Undivided, or I don't remember the name of the program, but basically it was about racial justice. And what they found is sending people through this, faith-based racial justice program did almost nothing to change their attitudes about race, but it made them significantly more likely to have conversations about it and to bring in people who also were like-minded and who could enact that change over time. And so there's a temptation to want to jump to how do we reduce polarization? And that's really, really difficult because changing attitudes, changing opinion is very, very difficult psychologically. So one of the things that we talk about is starting to make those connections with people who we disagree with in a way that is not at all political. And it's not that you're doing that to kind of get them in and then suddenly you're going to be able, okay, now that we're friends, let's talk about Iran. No. But by having those experiences and modeling openness, modeling nuance, we can slowly change the behavioral patterns, but it's not easy. Like, this is a really frustrating and in many ways sort of incomplete and unsatisfying answer. But we can't snap our fingers and change attitudes, but we can change some of the behavioral things, some of the ways we think, and we can do that by modeling, by being friends and connecting with people. That's really hard, and it might not work. The thing is, like, we think that will work. We don't know. We just don't. But it might be all we have.
40 years ago or so, Carol Gilligan, a psychologist who was out of the Harvard School of Psychology, wrote a book called In a Different Voice. One of the most influential books that I ever came across for multiple reasons, had a lot to do with ethical, moral reasoning, and also as a father of 3 daughters. Her premise in writing this, based on longitudinal studies of girls, young women, older women, was the distinction between feminine and masculine. So not just male and female, and that's an important distinction because men can have a feminine perspective and women can have a masculine perspective. The feminine perspective was significantly based on the concept of relationships. The masculine perspective significantly based on the concept of rights. These are my rights. These relationships are important. I would suggest that one of the ways, attitudinal change not being really possible, it happens, but you can't generate it, is to have more women leaders in our society. To go back to what Angelica was saying at the beginning.
I would just, if I can add, to me, one thing, we might not be able to change somebody else's attitude, but I think one of the things that it's just such a simple concept, it's just listening. Sometimes, rather than, it's a zero-sum game, I'm going to win and you're going to lose and I'm going to prove you wrong, it's just listening to each other. That's just a lost art, it seems to me. And that's something, again, when I sent a reporter out to the Eastern Plains to talk to ranchers and whatnot, and nobody in town wanted to talk to her. She was a reporter coming from Denver, and she's not one of us. She's going to be here to make fun of us or distort our views, and she spent quite a long time just, in a cafe talking to people, and eventually people came around because she's a great listener. And, sometimes people just want to be heard. And I think that's on all of us to just slow down a little bit and not feel like we've got to change somebody else's mind about something. Let's just listen to them. Let's just hear their perspective, and maybe by modeling that, we can encourage them to listen to us as well.
But in thinking about driving women leaders, it is about listening, but it's about talking too. Jen Lawless and Richard Fox have a book about this. Fathers are about 20, I believe, % less likely to talk about politics to their daughters than to their sons. Angie Boss and Monica Schneider and a number of other people did this study where they took kids and they said, draw a politician. And through, I think, about first or second grade, kids just draw themselves because that's kind of what first and second graders do as a father or a first grader. But I believe by about third grade, they start drawing men. It's not, the change, yes, happens at the adult level, but we have to start talking to young girls early if we want to build that leadership and we want to build that involvement in politics, because we're not doing it. And it leads to the ambition gap. The ambition gap is not innate, it is socialized, and we're socializing it way too young.
Polarization is profitable. So, as much as we'd like to say the country's split 50-50, there's people over here and there's people over here, if we actually look at our shared values and our beliefs, we're all sort of moderate. In theory, right, if we look at our values, our base values, we share so much. And so I definitely get inspired by that when I see it in our politics and in the White House press room and on Air Force One, where we're only seeing friendly journalists being accepted into those spaces. And now, guess what they're doing? They're challenging. They're asking questions. They're asking questions about the war. And they're forced to, because they know there's no one there to ask them anymore. That's my hope. That is the hope I see. As much as we want to think, there's people only over here and there's people only over here. There's so much more that we share. And my dad only talks about politics with me, which is really annoying. And he voted opposite of me. And I've been tracking in a journal his mindset. And at what point is it going to click? And it only took one event. And he's done. What event? War. So I think there's still hope in this polarized situation. And we have to remember that sometimes what we express or what we see in the media is just sort of the most concentrated or engaged content, and not necessarily represents a whole human being or what they believe in. And to keep those lines of communication open, even though you're just like, I'm so tired of talking about this, Dad.
I heard that a few times.
Well, thank you all. I think we're running out of time, and we could go on and on. But I'd like everybody here to please give a round of applause for our panelists.
And thank you all for caring enough to come out tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Listen to this. Thank you.
And before you leave,
So it's
I'd ask each of you to please fill out a form, an evaluation form for this evening. We have finished the inaugural series of Is Media Ruining America? And you've been such a great audience. And please fill out an evaluation for this evening. And let me remind you that this presentation was sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Jefferson County. We are a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at local, state, and national levels. If you're interested in joining us in this fight for democracy, we have a sign-up sheet in the foyer. And if you're interested in hosting or promoting these presentations to your community group, please note that on your evaluation form and include your contact information. We have postcards on the table as well, and we hope you'll feel free to take some and share them with your friends and neighbors. And that's it for tonight. Thank you for coming. Have a great weekend.